Good day, my friends and fellow blog readers of Worldly Saints. My name is Charles Heck, and this is Charles Chat, which is a weekly video feature of my blog, and it is Thursday, December 9th, 2021. And today I want to reflect a little bit on a question somebody asked me a few weeks ago. I was asked the question, what was the worst sermon that you've ever preached? And it wasn't that easy to answer that question because I have preached a lot of bad sermons. And normally the ones that come to mind are the ones that I've preached most recently. But there were two other sermons that kind of stood out. One was the very first sermon I ever preached, and I think I might give myself a little bit of grace there because, again, it was the very first sermon I ever preached, so I didn't know anything. I'd never been trained. I was a very new Christian. I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. I was asked to preach at a youth service at my church in Tulsa, and I went to my dad some weeks or months before and asked for some help, and he said, let's preach a text that you're very familiar with. I had memorized Psalm 23, so Psalm 23 became my text. And basically, I plagiarized his sermon notes, adding a few things of my own, but I took his sermon notes from Psalm 23 and kind of reworked it a little bit and preached it, and it was pretty bad. I have a lot of memories of that night because, of course, it was my first sermon, but I told jokes I didn't understand. I used illustrations that didn't work. I preached for, I don't remember how long, but it was much longer than it was supposed to be. It was just not a well-tuned sermon. Of course, like I said, I'm going to give myself grace. First sermon I ever preached. I was a young Christian. I was a teenager. Who knows how to preach a sermon at that age? The other one that comes to mind, though, is a sermon I preached in seminary. I was in a preaching class at the Master's Seminary, which included preaching labs, and these preaching labs were groups of anywhere from 5 to 10 guys with a lab instructor where you would preach sermons, anywhere from 5 to 6 sermons in a semester, and you'd preach this sermon, you'd get constructive criticism from the class, and then the lab instructor, and you'd get assignments for different kinds of sermons. Well, this particular assignment was to preach something from the Gospels, and I was a senior at Masters, getting ready to become a youth pastor, and I already had my eyes set on the Gospel of John as being the first book that I would preach through when I got to become a youth pastor, and so I decided to choose a text early in the Gospel. I avoided John chapter 1 because of the theology and kind of the intimidation of preaching a theological sermon to a bunch of seminary guys, so I chose John chapter 2, and I chose that first miracle of Jesus, the turning of the water into wine. And I was preparing to preach that sermon and going through commentaries. I probably had anywhere from 15 to 20 commentaries at that time that I was kind of working through, trying to decide what I wanted to use. Excuse me. And I realized pretty early in that study preparation that there wasn't a lot of agreement on the purpose of the miracle. And of course, every good preacher knows that you better know the point of the text before you preach it. Well, I avoided that main lesson, and I never landed on a reason that Jesus performed the miracle. And instead of stating a central purpose or central main idea, at the very beginning of the sermon, I decided to tell my audience that there are, and I think I probably listed 10 different opinions on what the purpose of this miracle was. I went over all those opinions. I did pros and cons of each, and I didn't even say which one I thought was best. I just kind of left it there and said, told the audience, you need to decide what you think is the best purpose. So I preached that sermon, finished it. And normally in the lab that I was doing that time, the lab instructor happened to be a man by the name of Alex Montoya. He would let the students critique you first, and everybody kind of gave their normal types of critiques. Then Montoya had his opportunity, and many students who have had Montoya before know that he doesn't mince words, and he will shoot straight with you when he needs to shoot straight with you. And he called me Chuck. And so when he began to share his comments, he said it basically like this. Now he's Mexican, so I'm not going to give you my accent, but he said, "Chuck, we are never going to get those 45 minutes back." And he said, "You wasted our time. You never gave us the main point of the passage. I'm not so sure you could call that a sermon." And he was 100% right. I knew it going into that sermon that I had not dealt with the text in a fair way, and it was a waste of time, and it was a great, great lesson. I don't know if I've got the point of the text every time since then, but it's certainly been a goal of mine to make sure I don't get up to preach a sermon unless I know why that text exists and why it's given to the church. And even today when I preach here, some 20 some odd years later from that sermon, I will at least tell my audience, here is the key point of the sermon. I'll give those actual words, and I want to make sure that it is out there, that people know why the text exists. So just a quick exhortation to those of you who are preaching on a regular basis, or preaching irregularly, or preaching at all. Make sure you always know the point. Know the key point, know the main point of the text. Make sure your audience understands it, restate it, clarify it, illustrate it, keep coming back to it. And I think you will find that your audience will grow in their understanding of the word, and you will grow in your understanding as a preacher. So hope this has been helpful.